I had all these coping mechanisms and alcohol worked the fastest. And my body was so accustomed to it. It was so used to that neural pathway that I was just like, I have to relearn all of my coping mechanisms. It's almost like I had to relearn yoga. I had to relearn breath works. I had to relearn how to eat for my body. I had to relearn all of these things because when everything got so overwhelming, is the word that I would use at that time, the pathway to alcohol and cocaine and, weird behaviors was the fastest one that, would just come. And so I just had no access to the smarter parts of my brain in order to make that decision. And that takes practice. That takes meeting the nervous system where it's at. And what I found in traditional recovery methods is that there wasn't space and time to allow to meet my nervous system where it was.
Thanks for tuning in to the Elevation Recovery Podcast, your hub for addiction recovery strategies, hosted by Chris Scott and Matt Finch.
Welcome to episode 201. Today's special guest is Amy Guerrero, founder of Thrive in Recovery and recovery life coach. Amy spent 2 years stumbling around in the dark trying to find her own path to freedom. All she wanted was to fully accept herself, to feel whole and happy living sober. But she was stuck. She was pretending to be happy, thinking the next meeting, the next therapy session, that's when she's going to be fixed. Finally confident and comfortable in her own skin. Yet it wasn't happening. When she reflects on this journey, what kept her going? She was driven by a vision of success, that building this for herself meant she could then share it with others. When she stopped using drugs and alcohol, she turned her healing into her work and started sharing years of education and teaching to coach people to live life with freedom, fun, and clarity in all areas of their life and recovery. On her website, thriveinrecoverywithamy.com, there are many valuable free resources. For example, you can schedule a complimentary call with Amy, and you can get a free download of her ebook, Freedom to Get the Love You Want, an on-demand webinar titled Healthy Sober Relationships, and a free 6-page guide you can download titled The Number One Thing Keeping You Stuck in Your Sober Life. Additionally, you can also subscribe to the Optimized Life podcast with Amy Guerrero and Jess Janda, which is a show about stories and strategies to help you optimize your health, relationships, and your business. And without further ado, let's now hear from our very special guest, Amy Guerrero. Thanks so much for being on the show today,
Hi,
Amy.
It's so good to be here. It's nice to see your face.
Yeah, you too. This is great. I talk about this all the time. I love the technology that we have, this high quality video and audio, and we could connect. And, one thing we love to do on this podcast is share other people's stories, whether they recovered from addiction and they're not professionals helping, or whether they're professionals that help people with addiction, and then even professionals that had addiction themselves, got into recovery, and then started helping people. So we got this huge mixture of all these guests we've had, and now today we get to feature you. I'm really excited to get to learn more. I'm super excited to share you with our audience. You've got a really cool take on things, very holistic, beautiful Instagram and website. So to get started, why don't we just really start off? What made you fall in love with helping this population? Where did it all begin?
That's a great question. Yeah. So it really began that I was looking for me. If I just put it really short, like blunt, when I was struggling to find my path, I was looking for someone to support me and meet me where I was at, like truly like come down to wherever I was or go up to wherever I was and just like absolutely meet me there with no judgment, with no agenda, and support me to understand that I was allowed to feel all my feelings, that I was allowed to choose recovery in the ways that had already been choosing it. I had already started on a recovery path with trauma, and I had no idea that I was going to become physically dependent on alcohol while I was on this journey. And then when I did, I was like, oh, this threw a total wrench in my plan. I was supposed to heal everything by the time I turned 40, not have to stop drinking and doing drugs, right? I just didn't really click that was going to be something that was that I chose to eliminate from my life. And I'm so grateful that I did. So that's how it all started. In my very first treatment center in 2014, I started writing the outlines for how I would structure support for other people.
Mm.
And like you said, a very holistic way. Something that I saw was missing right away was like, oh my gosh, like how we eat matters, y'all. And it didn't that was really getting missed in the recovery programs that I was in when I first started on this journey.
That's the same reason that, I left the traditional substance abuse counseling world. I was many years ago a certified substance abuse counselor in traditional treatment, and I just didn't see hardly anybody getting better. And I worked at a medication assisted treatment place, and we were giving them medicines and, counseling. Meanwhile, leaving out their poor, starving brains. Like, these are substances that really negatively impact our brains, yet you discovered when you went to treatment, hey, they're not really teaching us how to restore brain health or how to optimize brain health, what alcohol or various substances did to my specific brain. They kind of leave that out. And it's, I think probably looking back on it in the future, 10 years from now, people will be like, that was barbaric back in the day. So we love to feature people like you that understand that. And we've been getting a lot into the trauma aspect lately too. There's rarely a person I've met with an addiction or that has had an addiction that it didn't stem from some type, whether it was a trauma or they had a bunch of difficult experiences in life all happen at once. And, we're just it's hard to be equipped to deal with those. So do you want to talk more about what you went through in particular, or?
Yeah, absolutely. And just thank you for your work. And thank you also for having the courage to leave something that was already designed for you. It's so easy to just stay on the path
Mhm.
because it's already there. And it's much more difficult to choose to leave something that's supposedly working and then pave your own path. So just giving you massive credit there because
Thanks.
it's that's matters. And I think that, that's what I knew right away when I started to understand trauma. I was introduced to the idea that trauma actually lived in my body when, like in 1998, through a massage therapist in Austin, Texas. And then I found the yoga mat in 99. So this is well before I even thought about, I was definitely in college doing the whole thing.
Mhm.
However, it really resonated with me. And when I started practicing yoga, I started seeing tremendous differences in my overall health and especially in my mental health and my capacity to just take things on and endure things. And then that led me into understanding food and brain health and all of the things. I knew that my original incident that happened with me was my birth mom and many things that happened after that. However, in the 90s, it was still like major trauma, war,
Mhm.
accidents, really massive things. And so when I started talking about it, it wasn't very well accepted. And even in the therapeutic world, there wasn't very many people who were talking about it. So I just kind of just went on with my jam. I experienced with some psychedelics and MDMA, and I found a lot of medicinal effects from them. I did it without a shaman, but I did it in very planned, ways where I wanted to like come out with a solution of some type and
Awesome.
doing a lot of journaling and things like that.
Ooh, I love
Yeah.
this. I love this. There was just a recent study too. This is probably a few months ago. It was MDMA assisted psychotherapy for preventing alcohol relapse. And I think they compared it to, maybe it was just psychotherapy alone. But, anyways, the people that had the MDMA assisted psychotherapy, oh, their rates of staying off alcohol long term after that were phenomenal. And that stuff does make, I've read about research for PTSD too, and even decades ago how they used to give it to couples for couples counseling, and when it was still legal, many decades ago, all these psychotherapists were like, it was this huge breakthrough that they were getting people remarkable results, like 10 years of psychotherapy in like one day with the assistance of MDMA, which is not a classic psychedelic, but it's certainly. So I'm glad that you did yoga and then all this other stuff. It's like a lot of the stuff that we talk about, which, yeah, it's not evidence based, but it's becoming. They're doing studies now on psychedelics and on MDMA and on yoga. And so it's really exciting stuff.
Absolutely. And right now, as we speak, the trauma conference is going on. And yesterday they are getting the scientific data in place to prove that MDMA and psychedelics can support and I really want everyone to hear this, please, in a environment where you are guided and there is a professional, right? And that's not what I was doing. However, I had the intention of coming out on the other side of this. And the trauma conference is also including so many things on art expressive therapy and yoga and breath works and all of the things that it sounds like you and I practice on a regular basis so that we can have the beautiful moment to moment experiences that we have in life and feel all the things and be okay with it. Yeah. And that was, I think, if I put it really briefly, that's what I was really frightened of when I knew that I was physically dependent. So, I mean, I got to the point of dependence where I absolutely positively cannot have alcohol in my body because I become, biologically, chemically dependent on it. And when that happened, I was like, I have no idea how I'm going to continue on my trauma journey, more or less in life, without my coping mechanism, because I had all these coping mechanisms and alcohol worked the fastest. And my body was so accustomed to it. It was so used to that neural pathway that I was just like, I have to relearn all of my coping mechanisms. It's almost like I had to relearn yoga. I had to relearn breath works. I had to relearn how to eat for my body. I had to relearn all of these things because when everything got so overwhelming, it's a word that I would use at that time, the pathway to alcohol and cocaine and weird behaviors was the fastest one that would just come. And so I just had no access to the smarter parts of my brain in order to make that decision, and that takes practice. That takes meeting the nervous system where it's at. And what I found in traditional recovery methods is that there wasn't space and time to allow to meet my nervous system where it was. I mean, I learned a lot of like I picked up cigarettes again. I, started drinking too much caffeine. I started eating sugar. I was like, what am I doing? This didn't work for me when I was drinking. Why am I doing it now? And so really getting into the brain health and for me, understanding my nervous system and how sensitive it had always been and how I had literally drowned it out with ethanol and sugar and any of the other substances that I put in my body so that I just felt like I could interact with the world. And when I started really understanding emotional trauma and the complexities that it creates in the wiring in the brain, I noticed that although I was like such an overachiever, I had all these businesses, I made money, I looked good on the outside, I was doing all the things, my trauma was in me in a way that didn't allow me access to the smarter parts of my brain in order to actually put a structure and a system together to heal it on my own or to start to heal it, which, I don't believe that my trauma will ever be completely healed. However, when I'm activated in it, I can recognize it so much more quickly now and interrupt it, right? Not go on these weirdo pathways. Although sometimes I'll still get a little weird because I'm human.
Weirdness is good. I love weirdness. And we've been talking
Yeah.
about this topic a lot lately as far as rebuilding your central nervous system, which, depending on the substance someone is detoxifying and recovering from, there'll be different challenges. I was always prone to loving sedatives too. First alcohol and then benzos and then opioids, because my overactive nervous system from as early as I can remember, I felt different. it wasn't until my mid 30s I learned about the topic of highly sensitive persons and SPS, sensory processing sensitivity. And it wasn't until probably a few years ago I read Dr. Gabor Mate, where he has written about all the research on how childhood trauma or even adverse experience in childhood reshapes the brain and can make us much more prone to addiction later on in life. And so it's just such a huge link. And it sounds like it, at the beginning, alcohol and drugs were the quickest way that you knew how, and you were wired for that. You had created neural pathways and everything. It was such a habit, not just a wiring, but an unconscious basal ganglia wired maladaptive coping tools. And like you were saying, it takes time. You don't just one day you decide to quit and then all of a sudden your nervous system's better. It takes a while. It takes weeks, months, more like years before those neural pathways for addiction and for wanting those uh, kind of ways to change our mood, to change our state. Then all of a sudden, things like yoga and aromatherapy and diet, things that we wouldn't have like been our first go-tos in the beginning. Oh, alcohol. Or for me, at a long point after alcohol, it was opioids for everything. Opioids, opioids, opioids. So what you're saying is basically you had to break that and then rewire your brain through intentional, planned efforts, learning about the brain, figuring out how to optimize it, and then maintain consistency to where now your nervous system, I can tell just from looking at you, just from your body language, your nervous system looks very stabilized.
Yeah, for sure. Especially, yeah. I mean, yes, and I love everything that you said. It's so true that in the work that I do, I'm careful to not even use the word maladaptive. It's just like, wow, like that makes sense for where I was at that time, or that makes sense to where you were at the time, and your body just didn't know how to do it any other way. And something that it was so interesting because one of the words that I continued to say everywhere that I went, and those 2 years were very rough for me. I mean, I tried to kill myself several times. I just really had a hard time finding my pathway to recovery. And when it wasn't working, I was like, no, I just don't want to be here. Like, that's the solution because no one is really supporting me and meeting me where I'm at. And something I continue to say is, I don't feel safe. I don't feel safe. I don't feel safe. And now we know, like we know, that no therapeutic modality is effective unless the nervous system feels safe.
Mm-hmm.
And as a human, and especially as a practitioner, how do we create safety for first myself and then for the people that we support? And, that word, I remember telling my parents I didn't feel safe around them. And they were just so offended, and not because I meant to offend them, but they just didn't really understand what I was saying. Like you mentioned that your nervous system ran on a high sympathetic flight fight, we call it your home away from home from the polyvagal language. And your nervous system just ran on that fight flight. Well, no one really knows what that feels like unless their nervous system runs on that fight flight energy. And that's my home away from home as well. And it continues to be to this day. It'll never change. Now I'm aware of it and I have the tools to bring my nervous system up into a more flow ventral vagal state without using a substance, with using my breath, with using vagal toning, with using all of these tools. And when you're talking that language, which I already talked in a 12-step room or to a therapist at a treatment center, they're like, they would tell me things like, you're too big for your britches, you're too smart, you're never going to make it. And when they would say those things to me, then I was like, okay, then why try? Right? You're basically telling me if I don't do it your way, that I'm not going to be successful. So at my last treatment center that I went to in 2016, I dumped all of my notebooks on the desk and was so drunk. I blew over a 4, the highest of anyone that day. Yeah. I was really in the depths of it at the end. And I was like, you have to let me do it my way. And when I sober up, like, I will show you my plan. And they were cool because I was like just so ready.
Mhm.
I was just so like, okay, nothing else has worked and I'm not dying successfully. No matter how I combine the Xanax and the alcohol, I'm still waking up. Something's still happening. So, like, let's do this. And 3 months after I left that treatment center, I was supporting people with the Thrive and Recovery program.
Wow. 3 months after you left.
Yeah, because I'd been, yeah, exactly. I had been building it since 2014.
Yeah.
And then when I did it, I was like, oh my gosh, like, I really believe that there's nothing special about me. But if I introduce these modalities to people, maybe they're going to have a chance the first go around instead of the sixth or the seventh. Right.
Mm-hmm.
And, in treatment centers, you see the same people coming back even in your 60 or 90-day stay. And you're like, oh, okay. Like, there wasn't a lot of,
It's a red
there
flag
didn't
right
seem to
there,
be a
right?
lot of
That's a
concern.
red
Exactly.
flag when
Yeah,
people have been
it
there.
felt like it.
Mhm.
Yeah, it felt like it. I was frightened. And from a place of frightened, you're not safe. And so, what we know is that when we're in that high sympathetic or in that really low collapsed place, we actually don't take in the information that we're hearing. So we can sit in groups all day long. But the nervous system isn't safe enough, settled in enough to actually be absorbing everything that is being heard. And then actually having, we have to practice it. No matter what, one of the things that my clients and get so annoyed with is I'm like, oh, well, that's because you're not practicing consistently. And they're like, oh, so I've like figured out all these different ways to say consistency. However, just like we consistently turned to our substances of choice and to sugar or to Netflix or to gambling or to sex or to pornography or to just gossiping, whatever it is, we also have to consistently turn to a schedule
Mhm.
and structure and learn about the makeup of your very unique body because everyone has their own very unique history, experiences, and behaviors. And based on our history, experience, and behaviors is how we are going to respond to the world. And although we all have kind of the basic same responses to the world, I don't know exactly what you've been through. However, just like we're doing, we can read each other's body language and just be like, wow, you feel really safe and regulated. So I can speak openly and just feel yummy and good. Everyone doesn't feel like that.
Right.
Sometimes people are collapsed or talking really fast or not listening and waiting for their next time to talk. And that's all nervous system dysregulation.
Story of my life too. Like probably only honestly 2 years ago is about when I became really consistent, really consistent. Lots of balanced, regulated nervous systems for many years post substance addiction. But that consistency was lacking with me. So I would do really good for a while. Then I'd go into workaholism, caffeine addiction, usually coupled together. There was a food addiction phase. There was even a relationship addiction. I was addicted to a female, and she was addicted to me in a very unhealthy, codependent, extremely toxic situation. So, and I used to always envy people that seemed like they were just kind of relaxed and they could just enjoy life. Meanwhile, for decades, I was not like that. Didn't know what was wrong with me. Couldn't figure it out. Doctors couldn't figure it out. So, I mean, it seems like kind of just a basic thing for a lot of people, but for people recovering from substance use disorders or many other things, trauma, it is the key thing is all about the nervous system. And you've said so many things that I want to go deeper on. Let me see if I can remember all of them. One
Okay.
of them was that you didn't feel safe when you were a kid. I'm wondering
Mm.
if you can remember if you didn't feel safe before or after trauma, because I remember, and I won't go long into it, but I had a lot of traumatic experiences as a child from probably 5 to maybe 15 even. And one thing that resulted from that was I feel like I developed a fear of people because people that were supposed to be safe did very bad things when I was really little, and I remember them. And so then it was always like hyper scanning, upregulated nervous system to see if these people are safe around me.
Yeah. Oh, I love what you're sharing. Thank you so much. And just your insight into yourself is beautiful, right? Like really it seems like you have a visceral memory of when that started for
Mm-hmm.
you. And you came in, what happens is exactly what you're so wise as a child, right? We don't have all the filters that the adults have. And so your nervous system took on hypervigilance to keep you alive because you had to scan the room to make sure that you were safe. And that was a very similar experience that I had. My trauma, I mean, and now that I do this work, I can, definitely say without a doubt, it started happening in utero. And so it actually did show up for me while I was still in diapers as constipation. And, um, and so I was just a dysregulated baby, which is so like, for the adults in my life, so much more stressful as well. And so then my mom splits, like just a few months after I'm born. My dad is scrambling to figure out how to like make this whole thing work. My grandparents, my uncles, my aunts, everyone's like coming in, but already I'm not getting breastfed. I'm not getting held close to the body. So I'm already experiencing that disconnection, which creates a very anxious, highly sympathetic pattern right from the beginning. And then, yeah, I hid behind my dad's leg. My dad was a fireman, so he was 24 on, 48
Oh
off.
my
So then
God.
that created another dysregulation because the one person that I wanted to trust and be next to was, not consistently there. And thank God, right? He had this amazing job. He was doing all these things to make sure that I didn't just go to someone, right? So he really stepped in. However, in the 70s, we weren't talking about like children need to be coddled and have eye contact for long periods of time, and what you feed us is so important.
Mhm.
And so I'm not having children in my lifetime, but when I get to work with people, which often I'm always working with people with children, it's so beautiful to witness them come to their own and then be able to heal that attachment pattern with their children,
Mm.
in their life in recovery, and really learning that so many of their patterns and behaviors started from their childhood and that they're able to be that transitional character in their kids' life. Oh, it makes me so happy
Yeah, you're
to feel
living
that.
living vicariously through, well, not living vicariously through, but in a sense, you're working with people and you're helping them to create a treatment plan with them, co-create an individualized, customized plan to achieve the goals that you help them clarify and articulate. And then one of the kind of cool parts of that is you get to hear about how their relationships are getting better with kids. And so, I mean, looking back on your whole life, I'm sure you don't regret any of it, despite how hard it
Mm-mm.
was, because now your life has so much meaning because you're teaching these things that they're not teaching the stuff at mainstream treatment programs at all. Another thing that I wanted to talk about was you said that you just wanted someone to meet you where you were at. And that's one of
Mm.
the first things. Luckily, I had a really cool teacher when I was in school to become a counselor. And she was big into this. She said, going into being a counselor, you're going into traditional treatment. She said, almost everyone there is stuck in the box. I didn't know about this stuff. I had never been to treatment. I always went to my parents' house to get off drugs and alcohol. They ran a herb school. And so she was like, they're all stuck in the box. And you're learning all these ideas here. It was a holistic school for addiction stuff. And she was like, they're not going to like these ideas about nutrition and amino acid therapy and Qigong and yoga. They're stuck in the box. And so she was just saying that that's the world you're going into. A lot of the counselors or treatment providers, they don't meet people where they're at. They have a specific, and you said the word earlier, agenda. So now what I want to talk about is how you saw the things wrong with traditional treatment, how they could improve. Now, in your practice, how do you meet people where they're at? How do you help people? You're talking about vagal tone and, getting the nervous system from that upregulated state where you're just constant. And I had a guy the other day, uh, actually an ex-therapist of mine, Daniel G. Lyman, a chronic pain therapist, who helped me heal from chronic pain. He was saying that when people are in that nervous system of not feeling safe, they got the stress hormones all day, or like at least a lot of their life. He says that the body keeps creating either physical or psychological or both types of mind body symptoms, and people just go from one to the next: chronic pain, addiction, this, that, and the other, migraine headaches. And he's teaching that it's because you're in a heightened, fear state, at least mild, and also because of repressed emotions or suppressed emotions or negative experiences or emotions that have not been dealt with in a healthy way, that have been stuffed, causing these
Yep.
physical symptoms. So I know I just brought up a lot, but I'm sure you'll be able to prove
Absolutely. Goodness, and like where were people like you and Daniel when I was in? Because again, when you are talking to a therapist at a treatment center and you're saying these things to them, and then, they're human, so they have a response because they're not educated on it, which is no fault of theirs. And then they just shut you down because you're the client. So I've always been, I started my first business in high school. So I've been an entrepreneur most of my life, and also an advocate for myself. And so I stopped listening to them, right? Which didn't help my program, because then I didn't feel supported, which was my original incident, right? Like, no one gets me, no one gets me. And so what would I do? I would pretend. I was such a great actress at the time. I would pretend as if everything was okay. I would pass all the tests. I would do all the 12-step stuff. I would, do my third step every time I was in treatment. Up to my third step, I would follow all the rules, unless I didn't, and then I would break them for sure, just to get kicked out. I was either one thing or the other, because I just wasn't listening to them, because I'd lost respect for them, because they wouldn't meet me where I was at. So I would do exactly what we were just talking about. I'd stuff more emotion down. It would get stuck into my body. It showed up as constipation, blah, 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 blah. And how I meet people where they're at is well, first of all, I have the lived experience of what it's like to feel like someone's not meeting you where you're at. And so I can, it's really important for me to ask a lot of questions, get really curious, I'm constantly scanning the body. I'm listening, of course, to everything that they're saying, but I'm watching every single little movement in someone's face, especially on those first few phone calls. When I'm getting to know someone and we're deciding if we're the right fit to work together, or they're coming to a group coaching program as well. And I'm just looking for any of those signs of activation, and I'm noticing them and putting them into my system and understanding it, and then getting really curious with someone. And I think that that's so often what's missing in the world of education, is that just because I know some stuff does not mean I know that person, does not mean I know what's happened to them. And, I think it takes a lot. And again, this is why I'm so grateful for everything that I went through, because it gave me a lot of just feelings of like, I can be humble because I have that. Ooh, it's bringing emotion as I say this, because I have that lived experience of truly suffering. I mean, if you would have seen me on the streets of San Francisco barefoot with hospital tags on my wrist, and still going to the liquor stores in those conditions, like, you would have never, ever, ever, been like, oh, that girl's going to make it. You would have been like, oh, she's definitely dead in a few years. Right. And it was those experiences that supported me to get even more curious. Right. And I didn't come from that place. I came from a place where it was the quick fix and the judgment was the way to live. And then, thank goodness, that those few years in Austin, if I wouldn't have found yoga and wouldn't have started like, oh, wait, the body? Oh, this is so interesting. I feel that with you. Now, how can I find more people to talk through that stuff with me, to meet me where I'm at? And yeah, so meeting my clients where they're at, of course, I'm a coach, then I'm a mentor, so I'm going to push their edges. However, I'm always coming back for first safety, then push the edges, bring them back to safety, then push the edges. And so it's a very gentle process, And then someone might, you said like sometimes it takes years to heal. But honestly, like sometimes it's just a moment, just as fast as the car accident happens or the trauma happens, so can the healing. Then it's the integration.
Mm.
And it sounds like, especially with like chronic pain, it's the integration of all of those tools where one day the pathways actually start to reroute
Mm-hmm.
and you're not getting that signal of pain or discomfort anymore. And you're like, holy shit,
Mm-hmm.
I'm free.
Mm-hmm.
I am free. And there's just nothing. When I started to experience freedom, then I was like, oh my gosh, and you, but people don't understand that at the beginning and they don't believe it. And so what I hold on to is I'll look for that little bit of hope, that little bit of them coming towards me on the camera, or that little bit of like smile or twinkle in their eye.
Mm-hmm.
And I see that hope. And then I'm like, tell me about what's happening right now. And they'll usually, tears will come. And they're like, you're bringing hope. And I'm
Mm-hmm.
like, okay, cool. Are you ready to receive support? And that's when I ask, are you ready to come closer? Because it takes that little like, okay, maybe it could be different.
I
And then
love
we
it.
start consistently practicing.
And
And then they're like, I can't believe I signed up for this.
yeah, whoa, and that's the sign to me of someone that is a really effective coach that knows how to get really curious about someone, ask the right questions, study not just what they're saying, but how they're saying it, how they're holding themselves, feeling their energy. But if someone can go from they're scared at the beginning of the call, and then towards the end of that first call, or the middle of it, or maybe the beginning of the second call, you can get them to start feeling that hope and that, oh, they can start to see themselves and visualize it happening for them. And then from that place of more safety, more courage, more belief that they can do it. When someone believes they can do it, well, now they're actually going to take the action to do it. If they don't believe it, they're probably not going to do it. And it sounds like you hold their hand every step of the way and then teach them kind of by baby steps to get the little momentum going, more momentum. That snowball gets bigger, bigger. Soon it's this avalanche of recovery awesomeness. And then they're not even working on, substance things anymore. Then it's probably just life optimization. How can I make my life even more fun and full of positive mood and focus and energy and people and nature and whatever they're into?
Yeah, and finding their sense of purpose. Actually, something I say is I have a curtain behind me because I live in a small space. And so I say, let's just leave the substances behind the curtain. Like what I'm here to support you with is like, why the substances, and Gabor Mate says that consistently in all of his writings in the books. It's like, and why did we choose that? Why was that our fastest path? I mean, you grew up in a house where literally like your family was healing with herbs, and still there was something underneath of there that was why it worked the fastest for you. So when we get curious, so much freedom is possible. And we're not trained in our cultures to get curious. We are quick to judge, quick to cut off, quick to, if it scares someone's nervous system, like, no, I don't want to hear about it at all. We're scared to keep our hearts open. We're scared to, after we get burned, to actually be in a relationship. We're scared to tell the truth. We're scared to tell ourselves the truth. I'm doing something now where I'm combining, just for the listener's sake, Al-Anon and Coda and 12-step recovery for, substance or different forms of recovery. And I'm putting this all in one group program.
Nice.
And I'm calling it the Bridge to Trust experience. And what I'm noticing is that my clients, we've been working together, things are going really well. And now they're going into their relationships and there's that break, like where they've learned polyvagal, they've learned their nervous system, they're speaking, they know that their internal masculine, feminine energies, they're speaking this whole different language, and the other person is still viewing them as the addict or alcoholic. And there's nothing they can do to change that person. And it's absolutely right. They have to keep doing themselves. But how can we bridge the nervous system rupture that happens when we hurt people that are close to us or when they just
Mhm.
really don't understand us. And that's where it becomes this bigger mission for me of like, oh, we've got to teach everyone this language of the nervous system and that we're all one nervous system talking to another nervous system. And just because somebody does an Al-Anon group and the other one does an NA group doesn't mean that we're not still talking one nervous system to another with different types of coping mechanisms to downregulate the nervous system, whatever it is, you know. So it's been really fun to be in these rooms with parents
Mhm.
and hear their perspectives and then get to teach them like, oh, but wait, like, what if we just keep the substances behind the curtain and we talk about like how you actually bridge that trust again and come back to truth and honesty and some of these more simple concepts like you said earlier, which take consistent choice to change the behaviors. And in our family systems, we really like it when everyone continues to do their same role, right? We're like, but what are you doing? You're just supposed to be like that, and I'm supposed to be like this. And that doesn't work. And then we pass that on generationally.
You're talking about some really fascinating stuff that I'll admit this is definitely not a forte of mine. But I recently interviewed Diane Hayworth, who's the founder of the Be Love Principles, and I believe one of those four principles was God, something along the lines of look at, like, acknowledge every other human with an open heart and see the divine spark in them. And then one of the other ones was like look at people and talk to them with no agenda. And then she started to talk more on that. And then she was like, everyone's got agendas, when the person's, in their addiction, and that's their agenda, is their, in their addiction. When the person is, in a relationship with that person, they're the one saying, hey, husband, you need to quit drinking. This is not, that's their agenda, is trying to help them. And so I think this is fascinating because so many people do have agendas going into things. And when I look back, like everything you were just saying um, earlier about learning how to live and the nervous systems and people, that was the story of my life. And life was really difficult like that. It was so much harder than it had to be, so much harder than it had to be. Um, so, so yeah, you could just talk about whatever you want. I just love it's crazy because a lot of the things you're talking about we've been talking about on all the leading up to episodes, it seems, over the past couple of months. Really, what it is you're just really versatile and you have been doing this stuff for quite a while. You've learned a lot of cool stuff.
Yeah, for sure. And that's what I'm so grateful for is because, when I did finally say, okay, no more of this substances in my body, I had been learning for so long that it
Mhm.
was kind of the way I describe it
Mhm.
is like Keanu Reeves from The Matrix. It was like do 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 do. It was just like everything that I
It
learned. I
clicked.
was like, oh my gosh, I actually know this
Mhm.
stuff. Now let me go live it. And then, of course, when we guide someone and teach people, then it helps, really make it a pathway in my body as well. So, I mean, I'm so blessed because just even talking to you, we get to learn so much from one another's nervous systems and lived experiences. And I also feel like, the timing of things can be so magical in this regard.
Synchronicities,
And
big time. It's
yeah.
such affirmation and confirmation that you're on the right path and that things are so mysterious like that. It's just really cool. There was something else that I wanted to go deeper on. Oh yeah, you were also talking about uh, the vagus exercise to where the vagal tone and heart rate variability. What are some of the
Mhm.
things that you like to teach people for? We've talked about Wim Hof breathing and cold therapy, that type of stuff, but we haven't, gone too deep into this.
Yeah, for sure. Well, I mean, so much of what I want is, of course, meeting people where they're at. So Wim Hof therapy and cold therapy are amazing, but some people are not ready
Mhm.
for all of that. So just very simple things that I've learned from Steve Porges and Deb Dana and some of my other teachers are just take a longer exhale than inhale,
Mhm.
right? Just use breath, sound, movement.
Mhm.
Know that you have a vagus nerve.
Yeah.
And one thing that I love, yeah, and one thing that I love to remind people is that 80% of what is coming at me is neurocepted through the body without conscious awareness. So only 20% are we using the more cognitive, higher functioning parts of our brain. The rest is the physical body. So we say it's subcortical, meaning below the neck, that is constantly taking in every single thing that's happening in the background. And from that, when someone says they feel really triggered and they can't figure out why, and I'm like, well, let's look around. You know, did you hear a loud noise? What happened? The smell of someone's perfume can remind you of, you know, someone who violated you, and the body's neurocepting that, and then it's just like whoosh,
Yep.
flooding cortisol, adrenaline, and often we suppress that. Like, what the hell's wrong with me? Why is this happening to me? Let me push it down. Let me do these things. And it's like, no, all of this is happening for a reason. And your body is continuously talking to you. And even just the awareness of knowing, like, whoa, it's subcortical, like 80%. Whoa, that's a big percentage there. And so then that's motivation and inspiration to understand how to breathe, how to use a braking system to interrupt your patterns, how to, you know, some of my favorite things are how to work with someone to guide you into having lived experiences where you were in flow, where you were in a connected, safe place, and having those, so I would call like on demand. So if I'm in the grocery store and I just get really activated, I'm like, ooh, how can I anchor into like one of those moments? And I'll teach people how to sift through these exercises so they can bring in all 5 of their senses and more, their intuition, to like actually bring their body down, because the subconscious and the unconscious mind don't know the difference between you and I actually having a conversation here, or me preparing to say yes and turn this on, and kind of walking my body through like, okay, you're about to get on a call with someone. And it doesn't know the difference. And so there's so much available. And something that I love to tell people when they say yes to to investing in themselves and working on themselves and allowing me to guide them is like, no one can ever take this away from you. Like, no one can ever take away Judah in San Francisco on the beach and this image that I have. And just talking about it right now, I can feel it and I can smell it. Like, that's magic. Like, that I can do that to myself. When, like, last week we were evacuated for the fires, and I had to bring in all of my tools to just be like, okay, I know how to do this. I know how to walk through this, because my nervous system was dysregulated. And I did lose access to my prefrontal cortex, but how could I remember? So it's like I continued to breathe, I continued to anchor in, I continued to use my transitional objects and all of the different things that I teach, which I think is so powerful, because I'm like, all this shit works. It really actually works.
Well, and you're a good
Yeah.
coach and teacher too, because you actually practice what you coach and teach. There's a lot of coaches, counselors, and therapists that don't practice hardly any of the things they talk about. So that's always, and it's apparent too who those people are usually. And it sounds like you've developed a ton more of resilience, recovery capital, and resilience and awareness too. And you were even just talking about the prefrontal cortex. That's one of the reasons that I think people that are trying to recover from addiction need at least one person to help them, uh, even if it's a wife or a husband or a good friend or a coach or a therapist, someone with a healthy brain. Because if they've had even a moderate addiction, they've proven this now, is it disables and erodes the functioning of the prefrontal cortex, and that's our free will right there. That's the difference between right and wrong, like critical thinking. If that's heavily eroded and disabled, well, our free will is heavily disabled as well. So we just keep making these decisions that we don't want to, because our brain is like, the midbrain survival part is hijacked. Go, 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 drink or use drugs or both. Prefrontal cortex is not there fully to put on the brakes. So working with a coach or somebody, even if it's like a friend or an AA sponsor, if it's what works for that person, but to have a healthy brain when your brain is not healthy, a healthy nervous system, and that person can help you, because when I was doing it on my own, I could never have lasting success because it was all up to me and my brain just wasn't up for that job, you know? So too big of a job.
Absolutely. It's way too big of a job, and the
Mhm.
nervous system isn't in safety because it's not trusting that sequencing part of our brain. Because I couldn't sequence, I mean, walking around San Francisco with no shoes and multiple hospital tags, like there was no sequencing going on
Mm-mm.
there. All it was go get more booze and figure it out, right?
Survival mode.
Absolutely. And that's what we know. And even the slightest bits of trauma can do that for us. So I just love everything that you just shared. And it's so important. And that's where systems like the woman who was teaching that be love and that compassion can come in. One of the first things that I do in that first month of working with someone is support them to untangle this so that they can really see and feel like, oh my gosh, this wasn't my fault.
Mhm.
Like at one point, I knew that I wanted to do it different, but I had no access to sequencing skills.
Mhm.
And then, like, from there, you can bring in this, like, oh gosh, I forgive myself. And it's so often, especially in longer term, there's a lot of space between the substance use and where the person is now. There's what's keeping them so stuck is like this forgiveness piece.
Mhm.
And it's like all the trauma is just in there.
Mhm.
And when we start to allow that to be just we don't ever have to even know what it is. Like someone will just get the chills and I'm like, awesome, we
Mhm.
just discharged something, right? Like let's move it around, let's drink some water, da, da, da. Like the body will naturally let go of these things, and then that's when the catharsis or the tears or the anger can come out, and then all of a sudden it's like, wow, I think I have a little more compassion for myself and others.
This is fascinating stuff. Self-compassion is huge, and people that have addictions currently or that are, recently off, and like you were saying, even long term, a lot of the time they can hold on to that. They don't forgive themselves, they don't forgive other people. Oh, I didn't forgive myself, and I sure didn't forgive some people in my life that were supposed to be the closest people and the safest people, and then just stab me in the back time after time. But then over the years, like you're saying, I start to work on that stuff more. It starts to, have less of an impact on my life. I think from talking about the past on this podcast so much, kind of going back in the past and sharing the lessons that I've learned, that my co-host has learned, I feel like that has been a really awesome way to like healthily process those past negative experiences, those past uh, challenges that I had, whether it was something that I got myself into most of the time or something that just life just happened. And my mom was saying that when she was younger, she was going through a lot of mental health stuff. And her parents both died when she was in her 20s, I believe, really young.
Mhm.
And she got into one of the things along with meditation was primal scream therapy, I believe she called it. And so one of the things when I quit substances, there was a phase I went through where I was a robot. I didn't have good emotions or bad emotions. I was like a cold kind of machine robot. And it was like this protection because I was hurt so much. I didn't want to get hurt anymore. I was too emotional. Now that I was off drugs and alcohol, screw that. No one's ever going to screw me over again. Not a girl, not a guy, nobody, not an
Mm.
employer. So but I had chronic pain and I had like other issues too. And I was not happy and I was prone to anger and irritability. That was like the one emotion. And so just over the years and just being more emotional, I had to force myself. I had to like start moving my body around, listening to music, getting back into playing music. If I'm tired, if I'm stressed, shake my body and go, ah, my girlfriend
Yes.
and our daughter, they're always laughing at me because I just start singing the most horrible but funny stuff, or I'm just like moving my body around a lot,
Yes.
and that helps me like just shake everything out, otherwise it just
Yes.
builds and builds and you get tense and it's no fun. I'll shut up now.
No, it's no fun at all. And everything you're saying is like what I practice every day. And last night I got stuck in something. It was like all over my right hip, and I was like, "Ow!" It's just like let it out. And then I like to be witness too. So I called one of my mentors, and I'm like, I need some support. Like there's something in here, and it's just it's something that you said I want to just touch on too. And what I'm seeing, and of course, this isn't backed up by any science yet, is that often happens in someone who's masculine and claims that masculine energy, that robotic, like I just have to do exactly what I have to do, and da da da, and I don't want to feel too much this or too much that, and they just get into this process of recovery that's rare, very robotic. And then they often struggle with what they'll call erectile dysfunction, and I'm like, no, it's just like you're not allowing yourself to express, to emote, to sing weird songs, and to like be in your divine masculine energy. And I work with a lot of men, and it's just so fun to give them that back when they're like, oh my gosh, there's nothing wrong with me, I was just scared. So it's another form of a dorsal kind of collapse in polyvagal words, of going into that like freeze. Like I have to do this exactly like it is, or I will drink or do drugs again. And that's somewhere conditioned into their brain or through their experiences, and like no one will ever hurt me again. Oh my gosh. And so the heart is just closed down. But in order to thrive, we want to emote. We're meant to emote, right? We're
I
meant
love it.
to, we're animals. And so we got to do that. And it takes safety. And I love that your mom has these tools, because screaming is such a great tool.
Really
Like it is, I go down the canyons here in Topanga and just like, ah! And it just feels so good. And something moves, and we don't have to know what it was. It's just like, oh, I just feel better.
Just even talking about screaming and moving around makes it feel kind of good. How much longer do you have? Do you have another 10 minutes?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah.
Could you elaborate more on the sequencing part? I knew what you're talking about, but I'm worried that the listeners are kind of, and this is very important. So you were saying when you were on the streets of San Francisco, yeah, with the hospital bracelet on, I think no shoes, going to buy more alcohol. And that was just, total survival mode. It was just your brain knew how to get out of immediate pain despite the long-term consequences. Who cares? I just need to get out of pain right this second. So could you please talk more about that you lacked the proper sequencing abilities back then. Eventually you learned them. And then another thing you were saying too, oh, but boy, I'll think of it while you're talking about this, because it was.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you. No, that's such a great question, because if someone that's listening has a family member or themselves are in this place, I did not want to be where I was. I want to be very clear. Like I knew, like, oh my gosh, what is going on with me? Like this is not who I am. However, and I didn't have access to the smarter parts of my brain in which we sequence, meaning, Amy, go home, get some shoes on, take a shower, clean up. It's these simple things that the prefrontal cortex does for us to put things in order for us so that we know that to do. It's like the container of which then we know the next thing to do. But when I was in my reptilian brain of just survival, I couldn't access those things. So I literally couldn't think of them. I mean, I did the weirdest things. I asked total strangers to buy me alcohol. I was my building manager at the time, and like my building people were seeing me, and I just didn't care. Which, if I was a little bit more in just able to access, felt a little bit more safe, then I would have a little bit more access to that part of the brain. And that part of the brain can come back very quickly with the proper support, right? or you'll have glimpses of it, right? Some people will call me and just like, I can't quit drinking. I can't quit drinking. They'll get a glimpse of it. They'll come back into that part of their brain that can sequence like, oh, I got to put this down. I got to stop buying it. I need to call somebody for help. But then it goes back into survival. It retracts, it contracts and expands. And so I love what you shared earlier. We need someone to be our prefrontal cortex for us when we can't sequence.
An interim
Yeah,
PFT.
yes, exactly. And it has to be someone that creates safety for the nervous system and that you have trust with, right? Because if you don't, then you're not going to get to the place. And so often people will go to their abusive family or to their, someone who just doesn't treat them well. And I'm like, oh, no. That's not the person to go to at this moment. Like, that's when we do need to lean into support that might not be our family or our friends.
Right. And so one thing that I'm sure you do with the clients too, when you're first starting working with them is, well, of course you can be that person for them, but I'm sure if they don't have anyone else, then you're also, that's part of their plan. Like, okay, healthy social, because they're not going to work with you for the rest of their lives. And there's so many people, at least in America, many other countries, of course, that don't even have one person in their life that is just that unconditional love and safety, non-judgment, compassion, a good listener. So, I mean, it's just the human resource aspect of addiction recovery is the only way I was able to do it. When I was hiding it, no deals. But when my parents found out, said, you're going to be homeless, we're going to kick you out. You can live here, but don't do drugs anymore. So once I have that accountability and that support, a bunch of healthy brains, my dad's like a genius IQ, my mom, they're both healers, herbalists, meditation teachers. So then I had their support, their brains, their skills, and I didn't feel all the shame started to disappear because it wasn't a secret anymore. Everyone knew now, and no one was like thinking I was a horrible person. They looked at me as a sick person, luckily. So due to that, all the love and looking at me like I was sick and not just a piece of shit intrinsically, that was what gave me the courage to step into that, take their help, and just do it this last time. So the people and a lot of people will, work with a coach or counselor or something because they don't even have one person in their life that they want to tell their addiction to, let alone get help and get their support, let alone anyone that they even want to tell their problem, because they're so ashamed, or maybe due to their profession, it could be very dangerous if that information got out.
Absolutely. Yeah. And, something that I teach as well, and just even on Instagram, is how do we teach people how to support us? Because we all have our very unique histories, experiences, and behaviors. It often, the person's trying to help us and they love us very much and they're going to be there. If they don't, if it's not landing for you, how do you have that agency to be like, you know what? I see that you're here to support me, and let me tell you how you can support me. And of course, if you're like in the throes of your coping mechanism, then that's not available to you at that time. But as soon as it is, and this is what I think is missing out of the traditional treatment center, as soon as someone comes back into that place, how do we teach them how to start advocating for, how do you talk to me? How do you reach me? Because everyone does intrinsically know the answer to that question, how they like to be touched, how they like to be held, how they like to be talked to, the best tone to use them, the best time of the day to talk to them, the best way to help them heal that shame and blame and all of the feelings that they're having. And when you can teach people how to do that for you, that's so helpful to the whole family system. When my dad can use a certain tone with me and I'm like, oh, Dad, that's that tone that doesn't feel very good. Oh, that's right. Thank you. Right. And like, it feels really good to be able to tell my family that. And then that changes everything, where they have that same permission. Like, oh, you're doing that thing I don't really like. Oh, okay, cool. Thank you.
What a healthy way to be able to communicate with people, to communicate what you need, what you would prefer. Is that okay? Rather than having an agenda, and they don't even know what your agenda is, and they got an agenda you, and they're all unspoken, and then everyone's getting pissed at each other because you're not following my rules for how I think you should be behaving, and vice versa. So it can get all
Yeah.
just jumbled up and crazy. And while you were talking about that, I remembered many times when I was first got into binge drinking and then daily alcohol use and physiological, psychological dependence. I had people, ask me if I wanted help all the time, but it wasn't in the way that I needed. And I didn't know how to advocate, teach them how to do that. I was just so lost back then. So, yeah, we've been
Mm,
talking about a lot of skills, but one other thing, I'd feel bad if I didn't bring this up because I don't think I've
mhm,
talked to anyone on this show that is aware of this kind of information. You brought up the divine masculine and feminine, and at least what the push seems to be nowadays is there's no differences between men and women. You see that a lot. It's all construct, social construct, cultural construct. But there's even new research now that's coming out that women and men can not only get into addiction different ways, but it's can be due to different things and have different effects. So like men and women are different. Then there's also this masculine energy, feminine energy, which men and women both can have, and you can nurture and build it. And you have your innate thing. And could you do a little, miniature 5-minute training on this type of stuff? The difference between masculine and feminine, how you're able to kind of look for what's going on with your clients, and then add that to their treatment plan. Like, okay, I see right here that you're a female, but you're just way too masculine all the time, and it's causing you to be rigid. I mean, this is fascinating stuff. We've never talked about it. You sound like you know it. So let's go.
I
Mm-hmm.
do. Yeah, I love it. Thank you so much.
Mm-hmm.
This I could talk about all
Oh,
day.
yeah.
Yes. Okay. So, two things. One is yes, gender can be fluid. Absolutely 100%. Masculine and feminine energy are energies. So they're not fluid. I have masculine energy and feminine energy. You have feminine energy and masculine energy. We all have a divine core essence. Some people say that they don't, and interestingly, after we start, really kind of getting in there, then it's like, oh wait, actually I am, a female who really resonates with the masculine energy more.
Mm-hmm.
Awesome. And then we can see it in all of their daily actions. I'll give myself as an example. I think that would be the easiest way
Yeah.
to explain this. I am a feminine. I like men. I go by she and they mostly, and I prefer sex with men. I have a feminine core. I love to wear flowy dresses, and I'm just
Mm-hmm.
like da, 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 and I'm just like very soft and gentle. However, the way that my trauma influenced my upbringing, I created a masculine mask, a very strong masculine mask. Entrepreneur, drank like the boys, grew up in Texas, had sex like the boys, right? Like worked like the boys, did all of the things.
Cursed
Like
like the
I was
boys.
going to curse. Yes, I've done a good job of not making every other word that, but like I did that all, and that masculine mask was hiding my pain
Wow.
and also pushing down this beautiful creative energy force that I am, right? It showed up as endometriosis in my
Wow.
20 or when I was 18. And that was a big sign that my feminine energy wanted to be seen. And it's so interesting because in my trauma healing before I got sober, I was able to heal that. And when we push down, when feminine energy pushes that down, we often drown it with alcohol because that's all around our sex organs,
That makes
right?
sense.
We feel that shame.
Wow.
And so years and years and years of like, I've got this, get out of my way. Yes, I'm going to make $100,000 before I'm 30. I'm going to do this. I'm going to do that. Like I was great at it, but I wasn't really being in my divinity. And when we learn about our divinity and that divine core, then we can heal the outer masculine mask. And now I can use that masculine structure to be the beautiful entrepreneur I am. Right? I'm not just a practitioner. I have to run the whole business. And so I need that sequencing. I need that masculine energy.
And you know
The
how
way
to
I showed
shift
up in
it
my
now.
relationship. Exactly. I can feel when I get too masculine and I'm like, whoa, 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 girl, let's go to the beach. Let's go put our feet in the sand. Let's go back to Mother Nature. Let's go, get into some womb healing things. And then for the masculine, samesies, right? So many of the men that I work with either wore a macho mask where they were just like, I've got this and I'm going to drink and I'm going to be the life of the party and I'm going to do all these things and rah, rah, rah. And then it really like, there was a craving to soften. But then I also work with a lot of men that let their feminine run. And so their masculine energy is completely depleted. And they show up in their relationships with that more feminine role. And then, of course, the women don't like that because if you have a feminine core, you want to be pushed up against the wall and like, woo, yeah, fun, right? But that masculine man wants to be able to do that, but all he has access to is that soft feminine nature. And then oftentimes they're using opioids. So I love putting all of this together because the drug of choice and all of these things that I teach and work in, there's so many through lines. And I can just say, I'm like, oh, I bet you your drug of choice was this, just based on the things that they share. So that's a very quick way of explaining and defining these energies. And we could go so much deeper on that. That could be a podcast in itself.
Yeah, we'll do a part two in the near future on just that, because not a lot of people know about this as far as, the general masses in the United States adults. It's kind of like a niche topic, which I probably learned about in my early 30s. And real quick, and then we'll talk about where people can find you, how people can learn more, check out your resources. But I was in a relationship with a gal that had a lot of trauma from childhood, and she even from adulthood too. She was like 10 years younger than me, but lots of trauma, lots of trauma. She was on Klonopin prescribed from a psychiatrist. And this was probably a year and a half, 2 years after I quit substances and everything. I was pretty darn masculine. This is when I was, off drugs, and I was building a business, a new business at that point. I was getting shit done. And she was also very masculine as well. At the beginning, the first 2 months we were dating, she was very feminine. She was relaxed into her feminine. We were walking on the beach. We were going on long night walks by the bay and kissing and, doing all the honeymoon, early relationship, love, bliss stuff. But after a couple of months, once we, became totally in a relationship, committed, both of us changed. I was pretending to be someone that I wasn't. I was like pretending to be someone I wasn't because she was beautiful and younger than me. And I thought she was amazing back then. And so I was putting on a mask because I thought that's what she would make her like me best. She was also putting on a mask because a couple months into it, our true selves came out. I was actually a robot, and I actually wasn't this loving. I was an asshole. I was narcissistic for a couple of years there. And she was actually really not at her core energetically, but she was going through college to become a marriage and family therapist all on her own. She was working for it too, working and saving up for the master's program. But she was going to pay for all of it herself. So she was in super masculine mode. So was I. We butted heads and fought all the time. And so it's just not only for addiction recovery can this stuff be very important to know what your core is and what you're going through and how to be more integrated and fluid. But for relationships, the reason my new relationship of almost 2 years now with Ashley's going is she is so divine feminine at the core. She's creative. She's like nurturing. She's super caring. She's like this triple Scorpio, and I'm a triple Cancer. And we're just so perfect for each other. And as a result, I feel so safe and I'm flourishing in life, and vice versa. So that's another thing too, is, how intimate relationships can like boost not only recovery in life, but health and everything. Okay. So this was phenomenal.
Yes,
Where can people
absolutely.
find
And
you, Amy?
oh my God, I'm just so excited. I one of my group coaching programs is called Sober Relationship School. And such a big part of sober relationship school is like that this exists. So thank you for sharing that. I can't wait for everyone who's been through relationship school to listen to that part of your story, because that is what's so possible. And I love that you were able to come to that. So beautiful.
Me too. Better.
Okay. Yeah. Oh, I mean, and this is the whole thing. This is why we get sober, to have that. Oh, it's so
you can
good.
have a great life no matter how bad you've been. Oh, people can turn things around.
Absolutely. 100%. It's so good.
So your
Okay, so
Instagram's
let's see.
awesome. Where else can people get
Yeah, it's at Thrive in Recovery with Amy everywhere. So Instagram, Facebook, and my website. I have one-on-one coaching that I do with people, highly, highly personalized. I only work with a few people at a certain time. And then I have several different group coaching programs, sober relationship school, sober business school.
Wow.
And now we're starting this bridge to trust experience. And that's going to be for everyone to learn all of these concepts that we've talked about today, and do it in an environment where you can bring someone along that you would like to learn these concepts with you, so you can build more trust and recover that trust in your relationships.
Amy, thank you so much. Wow, this blew me away. I knew it was going to be awesome because I did look into you quite a bit coming into this, but it was even far surpassed my wildest dreams. I feel like not only is that next session we'll do together going to be awesome, but do you have online courses right now?
Absolutely. I took my business in 2018 to only online. And then I do live events when that will be possible. So everything is online.
That's so
So yeah, it's really easy. People from all over the world are plugged into Thrive in Recovery. And I feel so honored and blessed to meet you and to have this conversation. Thank you.